most amazing stories that I've read about the Illinois Central Railroad in relation to the Civil War is in this book, Main Line of Mid-America by Carlton Corliss, and it was published in 1950. So I want to read an excerpt of it concerning how the Civil War, in my opinion, was won in part by the Illinois Central. The Illinois Central, what I'm trying to say is, was very instrumental in winning the Civil War. Okay. So anyway, let me read on page 124, chapter 13, The War Between the States. It starts off, the Illinois Central was of incalculable value to the country during the Civil War. The least important service was the reduced rates for troops and supplies. A far greater influence was the fact that such troops and supplies could be transported at all, had it not been for the Illinois Central. The vast resources of the Central West could not have been placed at the disposal of the government as easily as they were. The operations of the Army would have been hampered and restricted, and the ultimate success of the national cause delayed that much. It was written by Howard Gray Brownson in a book called History of the Illinois Central Railroad to 1870. Abraham Lincoln had been in the White House but a little more than a month when news of the bombardment of Fort Sumter proclaimed to the world that the dreaded conflict was on in earnest. Colonel Robert Anderson surrendered the fort to General Beauregard on April 14th, and on the following day, when Lincoln was issuing his first call for troops, Nathaniel P. Banks, former governor of Massachusetts, who had succeeded McClellan as Osborne's right-hand man in Illinois, wrote Osborne, quote, "We are in for the war, a bloody, exterminating war. It might easily have been avoided, but now the North is one man, the South is another, and the fight is between them. In such a position, Shakespeare is a good counselor. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear thyself so that thy opposer may be aware of thee." Events followed thick and fast. Second only to Washington, the seat of government, anxiety was felt for Cairo because of its strongly strategic position at the junction of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers and at the southern terminus of the Illinois Central Railroad, which was its southern connections formed the only north and south rail route in the Mississippi Valley. In the entire country, there were only 4 gateways linking the northern and southern rail systems: at Alexandria, Virginia, Cincinnati, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky, and Cairo, Illinois. Military leaders north and south recognized that the side which held Cairo would control the Mississippi as well as the Ohio, Cumberland, and Tennessee rivers. On the day the first blood of the conflict was shed at Baltimore, Secretary of War Cameron telegraphed Governor Yates of Illinois urging him to send state troops to Cairo at once. The governor immediately telegraphed Brigadier General Richard K. Swift, in command of state troops at Chicago, to make ready to entrain at a moment's notice. A few hours later, a courier from Springfield placed in General Swift's hands the following message from Governor Yates: "Take possession of Cairo at the earliest moment. Have your expedition start as if going to Springfield via Illinois Central Railroad. The state of feeling in southern Illinois may require the utmost dispatch and secrecy." The call was made upon the Illinois Central on Sunday, April 21st, Shortly after 11 o'clock that evening, 3 crowded troop trains, 26 cars in all, stood in Great Central Station, their engines panting, puffing, and shrieking as if eager to be gone. Suddenly, as the station clock struck the hour of 11, signals were given, and as the first of the 3 trains headed southward over the trestle, quote, tens of thousands of people who lined the lake shore bade the soldiers farewell with deafening cheers. Round after round of hurrahs rang out from the prairie city and were seconded by the long, still, shrill shrieks of a score of locomotives in the neighborhood, unquote. This was the first troop movement of the Civil War west of the Atlantic seaboard. At dawn on the 23rd, 304 miles south of Chicago, the Cairo expedition crossed the Big Muddy River Bridge, a long wooden structure which could have been easily destroyed by an enemy. Here, Swift led a company of infantry and howitzer, and for the next 4 years, Big Muddy Bridge was never left unguarded. The expedition reached Cairo the same day, and the troops went into camp along the Ohio levee near the St. Charles Hotel, subsequently known as the Halliday House. The troops arrived none too soon, for on the 24th, 2 steamboats carrying war supplies for the new Confederate government were seen descending the Ohio, about where the Illinois Central Bridge is now located. Mortars were made ready, and when the first steamboat reached a point opposite the hotel, a shot was sent across its bow and first shot of the Civil War west of the Alleghenies. After a few tense moments, both steamers hove to and surrendered, bearing the first contraband of the war. Responding to President Lincoln's call, cities and towns throughout Illinois took steps to organize companies of volunteers. Galena's response was typical. Within a few days, the Joe Davies Guards, the only uniformed company in the first 60 to be received by Governor Yates, marched smartly down Main Street and across the bridge to the Illinois Central Station, where from atop a boxcar, the mayor of Galena and the parish priest bade the men Godspeed before they boarded the train that was to carry them to Decatur en route to Springfield. Little did the people of Galena dream that one of these men, an ex-army captain marching in the rear, would at no far distant day become one of the most famous military leaders of all time, Ulysses S. Grant. Up to the outbreak of the war, the Illinois Central had been enjoying a steadily increasing traffic with New Orleans through the Cairo Gateway over both its steamboat line and its southern rail connections. But suddenly all of this traffic, which had been so assiduously nurtured and developed, and on which the railroad largely depended for its prosperity, disappeared as completely as a bubble in midair. All communication south of Cairo was shut off, and the transfer steamers employed as ferries between Cairo and Columbus were taken over by the government for naval transport operations. From this time until the end of the conflict, a period of 4 years, the Illinois Central was largely a military railroad. The route of troop trains carrying soldiers from Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, as well as many from the eastern states to the western theater of military operations, supplying men, equipment, munitions, and provisions for Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Corinth, Memphis, Holly Springs, Grand Gulf, Big Black, Vicksburg, and scores of other engagements over the Illinois Central. During that stirring period, moved trainloads of troops, horses, forage, foodstuffs, ordnance, lumber, equipment, and supplies, while from Cairo northward over this road moved hospital trains and trains carrying returning soldiers and prisoners of war. It was not uncommon for the railroad to receive orders to move from 5,000 to 10,000 troops at a few hours' notice. By 1863, the Illinois Central was literally swamped with traffic, and it was found necessary not only to build and purchase locomotives and cars, but also to borrow equipment from other railroads in order to facilitate the movement of troops and military supplies and equipment. At one time, near the close of the war, the Illinois Central was renting 100 freight cars from one of the unfinished railroads in Iowa. Many years later, Marvin Hughitt, the Dean of Chicago Railroad Presidents, addressing a group of businessmen in that city, recalled those stirring days. Quote, "It was not only my duty, but also my privilege to be stationed at Centralia during the war as Master of Transportation on the 112 miles of road between the Point and Cairo," he said. It was a thoroughfare of the armies, regiments of splendid men going south, funeral trains of our heroic dead going north. The service performed was constant and arduous. We may well wonder how it was all accomplished. Had Hughitt been less modest on that occasion, he would have told his listeners one of the most thrilling stories of the Civil War, of which he himself was the hero. When Union and Confederate forces were maneuvering for control of the railroads of northern Mississippi, preparatory to the campaign for the capture of Vicksburg, the call went out for heavy reinforcements, including troops, cavalry, artillery, munitions, and supplies to be rushed to Cairo. Young Hughitt, who had risen from telegraph operator to Master of Transportation, received word that a large concentration of manpower and equipment was being placed at the service of the government, and that the needed troops and supplies must be delivered to Cairo within 48 hours. The, quote, "needle's eye," unquote, was the single track line between Centralia and Cairo. Hughitt knew this road would be taxed as never before. He also knew that the eyes of President Osborne and Army officials in Chicago, Cairo, and Washington were upon him. If anything failed, if the movement was not completed on schedule, the blame would fall on him. He viewed the task before him not only as a great patriotic service, but also as a challenge to his ability as a railway operator. Whether Hughitt realized it or not, this proved to be the decisive incident of his career, an incident which was to live in history and give him a niche in the Hall of Fame. Unwilling to share the responsibility with anyone, Hughitt seated himself at the dispatcher's desk when the troops and munitions train started to roll. For a day and 2 nights he sat glued to his instrument, keeping the trains rolling. When he rose from the table after 36 nerve-wracking hours at the key, every train, every car, and every soldier, horse and gun were safely in Cairo. Red-eyed and weary, Hughitt turned the instrument back to the dispatcher and started for home, determined to catch up on his sleep. But on the way, he was overtaken by a messenger bearing an important dispatch. New orders called for rushing all troops and supply trains back through Centralia to an undisclosed destination to enable military authorities to meet a new situation which had arisen. Once again, the young Master of Transportation felt that the eyes of men in high places were upon him. Forgetting his fatigue, Hughitt again seated himself at the dispatcher's table, and for another continuous stretch of 36 hours, he sat at the instrument, directing the movements until the last train had cleared the Southern Division. It is recorded that long before those 72 hours had elapsed, the name and fame of Marvin Hughitt had reached the ears of President Lincoln in the White House, Secretary Stanton in the War Department, and General Grant in the field. He had performed an invaluable service for his country. Not only had the troops and supply trains all been safely delivered on record time, but what was more remarkable, the regular train schedules of the Illinois Central had been maintained without interruption or delay. From that time forward, Marvin Hughitt was recognized as a railroader of the first rank. Promotion followed promotion until 3 years later, in 1865, he became General Superintendent of the Illinois Central Railroad. Hughitt was then but 28 years of age and easily the youngest general superintendent in the history of the road. Hewitt's subsequent career is well known. He left the Illinois Central in 1870, and after short periods with the Milwaukee Road and the Pullman Palace Car Company, he became identified with the Chicago Northwestern Railway. Under his leadership, the Northwestern grew from a small railroad to one of the largest systems in the country. For 38 years, he was its president. Hewitt's dramatic performance at Centralia in 1862 symbolized the spirit of the railway organization during the Civil War. Not only did the Illinois Central put the trains through, but it aided in many other ways to hasten the end of the tragic struggle. Anyway, if you'd like to read more about the Civil War in this book, it gives some more details. Main Line of Mid-America, the story of the Illinois Central, Carlton Corliss. I also want to say that Mendota here was one of the spots where a lot of the Civil War soldiers got on the Illinois Central trains going south, and they were on the old Illinois Central freight house platform waiting for the trains, and this is where they boarded. And there were several troop trains that came back too through this way. So Mendota, I'm in an old Illinois Central 1937 Illinois Central mail storage baggage car, and the Illinois Central main line is just right out on the other side of this wall here. And there's so much history here. And the old passenger house, which is a painting that I did behind me, used to sit right out here, and that's where Abraham Lincoln boarded Illinois Central trains at least 3 times. Yeah. Back in Illinois, the Illinois Central was busy moving trainload after trainload of returning soldiers to points of demobilization and other tens of thousands of individuals to their homes. That the war was not fully over, transportation-wise, is shown by the fact that during the war, or during the year ended June 30, 1866, approximately 85,000 troops, 517 war vehicles, and 20,000 tons of military equipment moved northward from Cairo over the Illinois Central. It is interesting in this connection to note that of the total northbound military movement through the 4 principal gateways, Alexandria, Virginia, Cincinnati, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky, and Cairo, Illinois, Cairo accounted for 31% of the troops, 20% of the vehicles, and 38% of the supplies. During the 5 war years, 1861 through 65, the 705 miles of charter lines in Illinois transported 626,518 soldiers and performed 128,255,327 passenger miles of service and troop trains, not to mention untold numbers of soldiers traveling singly or in small groups in regular trains. you.